There is a quote from the pioneering psychologist Carl Jung that cuts to the very bone of human experience. He said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Take a moment to let that sink in. To avoid facing their own soul. What does that truly mean? It means we build castles of denial, walls of distraction, and entire identities designed to keep us from looking into the mirror of our own totality. But what happens when someone else not only sees what's in that mirror, but uses it to shatter the very foundations of your hard-won peace? What if the strongest, most compassionate part of you is also, paradoxically, what they use to destroy you? You think you've escaped. You've done the work. You've read the books, watched the videos, and maybe even spent countless hours in therapy. You understand gaslighting. You know the signs of manipulation. You can spot a narcissist from a mile away. You have built a new life, a sanctuary of self-awareness and healing. You've come so far. And then, it happens. A text message, out of the blue. A chance meeting at a coffee shop. A single, seemingly innocuous comment from a new partner. And in an instant, everything you've built comes crashing down. Not because you are weak. Not because you haven't healed. It's because they have seen something in you that you haven't yet dared to face yourself. They have seen your darkness. And when a narcissist, a master manipulator of human psyche, sees the shadow side of an empath, it only takes one carefully crafted trick to make you question your entire sanity. Let me tell you about Stacey. Stacey is a powerful empath, a beacon of light for so many. 2 years after leaving her profoundly narcissistic ex-partner, a man who had hollowed out her sense of self, she had completely reinvented her life. She started a blog, then a workshop, teaching other women about self-worth. She wrote beautifully about healing, about finding your inner light, about the journey from codependency to sovereignty. She was living proof that it was possible to not only survive, but thrive after abuse. She was helping others find their light. Until one day, he came back. Not with a dramatic plea or a storm of angry texts. It was just one sentence, delivered in an email with a subject line that simply said, "Thinking of you." The sentence read, "I always knew you weren't as kind and selfless as you pretended to be." That was it. No anger, no threats, no accusations of specific wrongdoing. Just that one sentence. It was like a perfectly aimed, slender knife that pierced exactly where it hurt the most. Stacey knew, intellectually, that this was manipulation. She'd studied this very tactic. She'd written about it. She'd healed from this. So why did it still break her wide open? Why did a hot wave of shame flood through her body like a fast-acting poison? Why did her own inner critic, a voice she thought she had silenced, suddenly start screaming in agreement with him? She had spent years integrating so much light, cultivating so much compassion and understanding. But the unintegrated shadow, the part of her she had pushed away in her quest for goodness, was still there, waiting in the dark. And somehow, with a chilling precision, he knew exactly where to find it and how to strike it. Have you ever felt this, that sickening, stomach-dropping moment when someone sees a part of you that you've spent years trying to heal, to overcome, to hide, and they use it against you like a weapon? That is not a sign of your weakness. That is the devastatingly effective strategy of weaponizing your unowned self. It's what happens when your shadow hasn't been welcomed home yet. Carl Jung famously wrote, "The brighter the persona, the darker the shadow." This is the cruel, hidden paradox of the empathic soul. You've likely spent your entire life being the light, the healer, the understanding one, the person who listens for hours, who absorbs the pain of others, who shows up when everyone else disappears. Your persona, the mask you present to the world, is one of kindness, strength, and boundless compassion. But somewhere underneath all of that, buried beneath years and years of people-pleasing and thankless emotional labor, is a part of you that you dare not admit exists, the shadow. It is the exhaustion of always having to be the good one. It is the simmering resentment of being used as an emotional dumping ground, while others take freely without ever giving back. It is the quiet, shameful stab of jealousy you feel when you watch selfish people protect their energy, say no without guilt, and prioritize their own needs while you drain yourself completely empty. And it is the deep primal rage at having to understand everyone while feeling that no one, not once, truly tries to understand you. This isn't your weakness. This is not a sign that you are secretly a bad person. This is your raw, unfiltered, beautiful humanity. But when you haven't integrated these feelings, when you've labeled them as bad, unspiritual, or selfish, and pushed them down into the cellar of your psyche, they become the perfect unlocked gateway for a skilled manipulator. The narcissist doesn't need to break you down with obvious cruelty or blatant lies. They are far more subtle, far more insidious. They just need to awaken your own shadow before you're ready to face it yourself. They hold up a mirror, not to their own darkness, but to yours. They whisper the very thing your deepest fear already believes. You're not who you pretended to be. You're not as good as everyone thinks. And suddenly, your inner critic, which is really just the voice of your exiled shadow, screams, "What if they're right? What if all this healing is a fraud? What if underneath it all I'm not actually good? What if I'm just as selfish and cruel as everyone else?" If this idea of the shadow, this hidden part of you, is already sparking a new perspective, a flicker of recognition in your soul, take a moment to subscribe to Mind Decode Explained. We journey through these intricate landscapes of the mind together, not to find easy answers, but to find profound, lasting wholeness. We believe that understanding is the first step to freedom, and we are here to walk that path with you. Let me tell you another story about a man named Tom. Tom was a successful therapist, a devoted father, and known in his community as the guy who would drop everything to help anyone in need. He was the epitome of the good man. His narcissistic mother, a woman who had spent his childhood chipping away at his self-esteem with her unpredictable moods and cutting remarks, had been out of his life for 3 years. He'd done the work. He'd been in therapy, established firm boundaries, and genuinely felt he had healed from the deep wounds of his upbringing. He felt strong, grounded, and integrated. Then she called on his birthday. His guard was down. It was a day for celebration. Her voice on the phone was dripping with a false, saccharine sweetness he knew all too well. "I know you think you're this enlightened spiritual person now," she began. "But I remember when you were a teenager. I remember how you screamed at me. I remember how cruel you could be. That's the real you. That's still who you are underneath all this pretending." Tom hung up the phone and couldn't stop shaking. His hands trembled, his heart pounded, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Because here's the devastating truth. She wasn't entirely wrong. He had screamed at her. As a desperate, trapped teenager, pushed to his emotional limit day after day, he had been cruel at times, lashing out at the very person who was slowly destroying his sense of self. But he had never, ever forgiven himself for those moments. He had buried them deep, coated in layers of shame. In fact, he had built his entire adult identity, his entire career as a therapist, around being the polar opposite of that angry boy. He was kind, patient, and understanding. He was better. He was the opposite of everything she was. And in one single calculated sentence, she reached into his past, pulled out his deepest shame, and dragged him right back into that dark room with that terrified, furious boy. This is the shadow trap. You become so profoundly afraid of your own darkness, of your own capacity for anger, selfishness, or cruelty, that you inadvertently give others the power to weaponize it against you. You react with such visceral horror to being called selfish, not because you actually are pathologically selfish, but because you've never ever allowed yourself to be selfish, not even in small, healthy ways. You panic when someone questions your kindness because you've built your entire worth on being kind, never integrating the parts of you that sometimes, justifiably, don't want to be kind. And narcissists, with their predatory intuition, have a sixth sense for this. They can smell unintegrated shadow from across a room. They know, with uncanny precision, that the more desperately you need to be seen as good, pure, or healed, the more easily they can control you simply by threatening that fragile image. Take a gentle, honest moment with yourself right now. What part of your personality do you most fear being accused of? What label would absolutely devastate you to have someone say about you? Is it being selfish, manipulative, angry, fake, dishonest? That thing, that word that makes your stomach clench, that is your shadow calling. That is the part of you that has been exiled, cast out into the wilderness of your unconscious, waiting not to be destroyed, but to be reclaimed. Because here is the profound truth that Carl Jung understood, a truth that most people miss in their pursuit of light and perfection. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is not the source of your evil. It is the neglected part of you that holds your power, your boundaries, and your authenticity. The empath who never allows themselves to feel or express healthy selfishness inevitably becomes a doormat, their energy depleted by emotional vampires. The person who refuses to acknowledge their own capacity for anger becomes a perpetual victim, unable to recognize or defend against boundary violations. The one who cannot look at their own darkness, their own potential for jealousy or resentment, becomes easy prey for those who can see it with perfect clarity and know exactly how to provoke it. When you reject essential parts of yourself, you are unknowingly handing the keys to your emotional destruction to others. Here is a truth that will revolutionize your understanding of manipulation. You don't fall apart because a narcissist's comment hurts you. You fall apart because you have been hiding the parts of yourself that are still hurting. Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection. It occurs when someone's comment, accusation, or judgment lands a direct hit on a piece of your psyche that you haven't yet integrated, haven't made peace with, and haven't brought into the light of your conscious awareness. They are not attacking your actual weak spots. They are attacking the parts of you that you believe are weak spots, the parts you deny even belong to you. Think about it. They call you manipulative, and you lose your absolute mind for 3 days, replaying every interaction, paralyzed by self-doubt. It's not because you are some evil, calculating manipulator. It's because you have never allowed yourself to consciously acknowledge the subtle, often unconscious ways you do try to control outcomes through your excessive kindness, your compulsive helpfulness, your people-pleasing. You do it to keep the peace, to feel safe, to be loved. It is a survival strategy, but it is a form of subtle manipulation, and you have disowned it. So when they name it, it feels like an exposure of your deepest, darkest secret. They say you're selfish, and you spiral into days of shame and self-hatred. It's not because you're a pathologically selfish person. It's because you have never given yourself permission to have normal, healthy self-interest. You've never allowed yourself to want things just for you, to prioritize your own needs, to say no simply because you don't feel like it. You've labeled all self-interest as bad, so the accusation feels like a fundamental damnation of your character. They accuse you of being fake, and your entire world collapses. Not because you are an imposter, but because you've been so terrified of being your authentic, messy, human self that you may have lost touch with who you really are underneath all the layers of performance, of being the healed one, the strong one, the spiritual one. This is the brilliant, twisted reality reversal game that skilled manipulators play. They don't gaslight you with obvious, easily dismissed lies. They gaslight you with uncomfortable, distorted truths about parts of yourself you are not yet ready to own. Then they sit back and watch you tear yourself apart, desperately trying to prove them wrong. Because here's the twisted psychological principle that most people never understand. Once you are in a position where you feel you have to prove that you are a good person, you have already lost the game. Genuinely good people don't spend their lives trying to prove they're good. They simply are. They know they are human. They know they are flawed. They know they make mistakes. And they know they are still, fundamentally, worthy of love and respect. But when you are carrying unintegrated shadow material, when you are secretly terrified that maybe, just maybe, you aren't as good as you try so hard to be, you become desperate to maintain that perfect image. And that desperation makes you completely and utterly controllable. Let's look at our third story, the story of Mary. Mary had spent 2 years in intensive therapy after leaving her emotionally abusive partner. She was well versed in the language of healing. She understood codependency, trauma bonding, attachment wounds, all of it. She had done EMDR, somatic therapy, inner child work. She felt healed, strong, and finally ready to trust again. Then she started dating someone new. He seemed different. He was emotionally available, kind, and conscious. He talked about his own therapy, about growth, about healthy communication. He seemed to be everything her ex wasn't. About 3 months into the relationship, during their first real conflict, Mary gently asked him if he could help more with some household tasks. His response stopped her cold. He looked at her with a calm, analytical expression and said, "You know, you have this way of making everything about your trauma and your needs. It's actually pretty selfish when you think about it. Other people have problems too, but you tend to center yourself in every conversation." Mary knew, on a logical level, that this was unfair. She knew she wasn't making everything about her trauma. She had been so careful, so balanced, so considerate of his needs and feelings. But the comment hit something deeper, something tender and unhealed, because there was a tiny, insecure part of her that secretly wondered, was she being too much? Was she taking up too much space with her healing journey? Had her necessary focus on her own recovery inadvertently made her self-absorbed in ways she couldn't see? For the next week, she fell back into old patterns. She apologized profusely. She minimized her needs. She went out of her way to prove how considerate and unselfish she could be. She stopped talking about her therapy sessions. She stopped asking for help. She made herself smaller and smaller and smaller, trying to show him she wasn't the selfish person he had accused her of being. It took her months to realize that she had been masterfully, devastatingly manipulated, not with lies, but with a tiny grain of truth twisted into a psychological weapon. Because yes, healing does require a certain amount of self-focus. Yes, trauma recovery does mean centering your own experience for a while. Yes, learning to ask for what you need can feel selfish when you've spent your entire life putting everyone else first. But owning that reality, integrating that truth about the necessary selfishness of healing, would have made her completely immune to his manipulation. She could have responded with, "You're right. My healing does require a lot of my focus right now. It's a priority for me, and I need a partner who can support that." Instead, she rejected that part of herself and her journey, and in doing so, it became her point of maximum vulnerability. This is precisely why shadow work is not a psychological luxury or a form of spiritual bypassing. It is a critical act of emotional survival in a world that can be full of emotional predators. When you have done the work of integrating your darkness, when you have made peace with the full, messy, glorious spectrum of who you are, manipulation simply bounces off you like water off glass. Imagine it. Someone says, "You're so selfish." An integrated person can respond, "Sometimes I am. We all are. That's part of being a human with needs and desires. What specific need of mine is bothering you right now?" They call you angry. Yes, I can be. Anger is a healthy emotion that often shows me where my boundaries have been crossed. It's valuable information for me. They accuse you of being fake. I'm learning to be more authentic every day. Thanks for pointing out an area where I might still be performing out of old habits. I appreciate the observation. Do you feel the difference? There is no defensiveness. There is no desperate need to prove them wrong. There are no 3-hour circular conversations trying to justify your character. There is just calm, grounded acknowledgement of your full humanity. But when you are split off from these parts of yourself, when you are terrified of your own shadow. Every accusation feels like a death threat to your carefully constructed identity. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The narcissist who triggers you so intensely isn't showing you who you are. They are showing you who you are deeply afraid you might be." And that fear, that desperate white-knuckled need to be perfect and to never embody those rejected qualities, becomes the very mechanism that controls you. Here's something most people don't understand about the dynamic of narcissistic abuse. It's not really about them being evil, mustache-twirling villains. From a Jungian perspective, it's about them being completely and utterly unconscious of their own massive shadow, so they project it onto you. They make you carry their disowned shame. They make you carry their rejected vulnerability. They make you carry their hidden self-hatred. They cannot possibly face these things in themselves, so they unconsciously dump them onto the nearest empath who, due to their compassionate nature, will willingly accept the projection. And if you haven't done your own shadow work, you'll not only accept that projection, you'll carry it as if it truly belongs to you. You will apologize for their disowned emotions and try to heal their rejected parts. But the moment you recognize the game, the moment you see with blinding clarity that their accusations are almost always confessions, that their judgments are nothing more than projections of their own inner state, everything changes. You stop taking responsibility for their emotional baggage. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who is fundamentally incapable of seeing it because they can't even see themselves. You stop giving your power away to people who are terrified of their own. The manipulation only works when you are afraid of your own darkness. When you have made peace with your shadow, there is literally nothing left for them to weaponize against you. Healing isn't about becoming a perfect, flawless being of pure light. Healing is about becoming real. Healing is the moment when you can finally look in the mirror, into your own eyes, and say with quiet conviction, "Yes, I have been angry. Yes, I have been selfish. Yes, I have been petty and jealous and small. Yes, I am human, and I love and accept myself anyway." When you reach that point, no one can ever manipulate you with that truth again. Let's return to Stacey. After that devastating email, instead of spiraling, she took a new path. She started keeping what she called a shadow journal. Instead of her usual gratitude lists and positive affirmations, she began to write down all the things she had never allowed herself to feel or admit. "I am tired. I am so tired of being everyone's emotional support system. I sometimes feel superior to people who haven't done as much inner work as me. I used to fantasize about my ex getting hurt in the same way he hurt me. I am jealous of people who can be openly selfish without feeling a shred of guilt. Sometimes I don't want to be understanding. Sometimes I just want to be righteously, unapologetically angry." At first, writing these truths felt dangerous, sacrilegious even. It felt like she was betraying the healed identity she had worked so hard to build. It felt like she was becoming the very thing she'd tried so hard not to be. But as she continued, something remarkable happened. The more honest she became with herself about her dark feelings, the less power they had over her. The more she consciously acknowledged her shadow, the less it could control her from the unconscious. The more she integrated these rejected parts of herself, the more whole, authentic, and paradoxically, the more genuinely compassionate she felt. Months later, her ex tried his manipulation tactics again, sending another email attempting to shame her for not being the perfect spiritual guru she claimed to be. But this time, something fundamental had shifted within her. She didn't feel the need to defend herself. She didn't argue. She didn't waste a single second of her precious energy trying to prove her goodness. She simply replied, "You're right. I'm not perfect. I'm not always kind. I'm human. Which means I'm flawed and complex and sometimes difficult. And that's exactly why I no longer have people in my life who can't handle the full truth of who I am." The manipulation stopped working because there was nothing left to manipulate. She had already owned the very parts of herself he was trying to use against her. This is what Jung meant by the profound process of individuation. It is the journey of becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, light and dark, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, into a unified self. It is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming complete. It is not about transcending your humanity. It is about embracing it, fully and without apology. Tom, the therapist, discovered this profound shift too, when his mother called again months later, armed with her usual arsenal of shame and guilt, starting with her go-to line, "You'll never change. You're still that angry little boy who screamed at me." He found himself responding from a completely different place. There was no tremor in his voice, no defensive anger. Instead, with a calm he had never known, he said, "You know what, Mom? You're right. I did scream at you. I was cruel sometimes." I was a hurt and terrified teenager who didn't know any other way to express the immense pain I was in. I'm not proud of those moments, but I'm not ashamed of them anymore either. They were a part of my journey to becoming the man I am now. His mother was silent on the other end of the line. For the first time in his entire life, she had nothing to say. Because manipulative people depend on your rejection of your own humanity. When you embrace it instead, their weapons become useless. They're looking for the part of you that will crumble under their accusations. But when you've already accepted and integrated those parts, there's nothing left to crumble. Think about this for a moment. What if the parts of yourself you have been most ashamed of are actually your greatest sources of untapped power? What if your anger is really your boundary system, screaming to protect you? What if your selfishness is really your self-preservation instinct, trying to keep you alive and resourced? What if your jealousy is not a sign of your inadequacy, but your intuition showing you what you deeply desire and deserve? What if your darkness isn't something to be eliminated, but something to be integrated, to be mined for its wisdom and its strength? Mary learned this lesson the hard way, but she did learn it. After months of people-pleasing her new partner, after shrinking herself smaller and smaller to prove she wasn't too much, she finally reached her breaking point. She started speaking up about her needs without apologizing. She stopped minimizing her emotions to make him comfortable. She embraced what she had once called her selfishness and recognized it for what it was: healthy, necessary self-advocacy. She started saying things like, "I need more emotional support in this relationship, and if you can't provide that, we need to have a serious conversation. And my healing journey is important to me, and I won't be with someone who sees my focus on it as a character flaw. And most importantly, I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to have needs. I am allowed to prioritize my own well-being." And her partner? He couldn't handle it. He started picking fights, withholding affection, and threatening to leave. Because he hadn't been attracted to her wholeness, he had been attracted to her wound. He was drawn to the part of her that would abandon herself to make him comfortable. When she stopped playing that role, when she became integrated, real, and therefore unmanipulatable, he lost interest. And that's when Mary realized the most powerful and liberating truth about shadow work. When you become whole, you naturally repel people who need you to stay broken. The right people, the healthy people, are attracted to your authenticity, not your performance. They want to be with the real you, shadow and light, together. People think liberation comes from finally defeating the evil or toxic person in their life. But the real, lasting liberation comes when that person can no longer touch the parts of you that you once hated about yourself. As Jung so wisely stated, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you integrate your shadow, when you bring your rejected, exiled parts back home to yourself, your light becomes genuine and unshakable. You don't have to be the nicest person in the room to feel worthy. You don't have to be perfect to be lovable. You don't have to perform goodness to feel a sense of belonging. You can simply be yourself, complex, flawed, human, and whole. And in that wholeness, manipulative people lose all their power over you. because they no longer know where to attack. They're searching for your rejected parts, your disowned emotions, your secret shames. But when those parts are integrated, when they are welcomed home and seated at the table of your conscious identity, there is nothing hidden for a predator to exploit. You become like water fluid, adaptable, but impossible to break. Someone tries to shame you for being angry. Yes, I feel anger. It helps me recognize when my boundaries are being crossed. They accuse you of being selfish. Yes, I do prioritize my well-being. That's how I have the energy to genuinely show up for others. They say you're too sensitive. Yes, I am sensitive. It's one of my greatest strengths, and sometimes my greatest challenge. No defense, no desperation. Just calm, sovereign ownership of your full humanity. This is what it means to be truly confident, not pretending you're perfect, but knowing, deep in your bones, that you are whole. Stacey described it like this in her journal one evening. I used to be terrified that people would discover I wasn't as good as I appeared to be. Now, I just am who I am. Good days and bad days, light moments and shadow moments. And the people who can't handle all of that aren't my people. The beautiful paradox of shadow integration is this. The more you accept and embrace your darkness, the brighter your authentic light becomes, not the forced, brittle light of performance, but the genuine, warm radiance of someone who has nothing left to hide. You stop being afraid of yourself. And when you are no longer afraid of yourself, you are no longer afraid of other people's projections either. You become unmanipulatable, not because you are perfect, but because you are finally gloriously real. If you have ever found yourself falling apart, despite knowing all the theories about manipulation and abuse, despite understanding narcissism and gaslighting and trauma, please know this: it is not a failure. It is an invitation. An invitation from the deepest part of your soul to turn inward and see the shadow parts of yourself that are crying out, not for judgment, but for love. It is not your light that makes you invulnerable to manipulation. It is the complete, integrated truth of who you are. No hiding, no performing. No needing anyone's permission to exist as a full human being. The narcissist saw your shadow and they panicked because it meant you were becoming real. And when you're real, when you're integrated and whole, no one can use your humanity against you anymore. Your shadow isn't your weakness. It is your power, finally coming home. As Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you think you should be, not who others demand you to be, but who you truly, deeply are. Take a moment to reflect. What part of your shadow are you finally ready to embrace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this message spoke to your soul, share it with someone else who is on their journey home to themselves.